Welcome back for the 4th year of reviews on this channel, the first, of course, being for that atrocity known as Modern Warfare 3. Now this year I'm going to do something slightly different. Most viewers know there should be at least some delays in an online game, but what constitutes an appropriate or even average amount of delay doesn't seem to be common knowledge quite yet. To that end, delays shown for Advanced Warfare will also be compared with various other games in the FPS genre to give you an idea of what the rest of the industry has to offer and how COD's developers measure up. In addition, I will be uploading quite a few videos as part of a programming series for in-game FPS netcode. That will allow you to see many of the issues discussed here from the perspective of a developer, including the code required to make all of that happen. So check back every once in a while or subscribe for automatic updates. We'll start with offline split screen delay. Delay being referred to here is the time it takes for one player's actions to be sent, received, processed, and displayed in another player's game. Split screen is of course the same game being seen from two different viewpoints, so there should be no delay whatsoever, as we can see with Halo 3. Advanced Warfare's split screen, however, averages a delay of 83 milliseconds, a bad sign right out of the box. But I hope you're not using split screen in a competitive setting, so let's move on to LAN or System Link. In LAN, actual pings are as close to 0 milliseconds as possible, but if a game doesn't use separate code or settings to handle LAN as opposed to online play, it will suffer online type delays. Advanced Warfare is clearly in the latter category, showing delays of more than 100 milliseconds averaged over 50 recordings. Again, in a comparison with other games, Advanced Warfare suffers from far greater delays. Bad news for the professional players hoping for fair tournaments. Please note that yes, there is a host advantage in LAN games. With delays this significant, tournament players must ensure the host is not playing the match. For regular online gameplay, Advanced Warfare's baseline delay, the delay at 0 ping, is roughly the same as it is for LAN play. As pings increase, delays increase by half that amount, as one would expect. As usual, I have used network emulation to obtain these precise values, but remember in the real world delays will fluctuate based on your connection quality. Once again, in a comparison, Advanced Warfare suffers from the highest delays shown, stemming from its very high baseline delay. Somewhat surprising are the results for Halo 3, which aren't much better. This brings up the related topic of frames per second, as Halo 3 was running at 30 versus Advanced Warfare's 60. Some individuals have their own opinions on the matter of an ideal frame rate for cinematic presentation, but there is no discussion when it comes to responsiveness, which is a large part of what we're evaluating here by looking at delays. That responsiveness later translates to fairness in multiplayer first-person shooters. The difference between 30 and 60 frames per second is nearly 17 milliseconds, an amount which may be doubled or even tripled in multiplayer depending upon the game's code and the specific situation. More detail on that in the programming series perhaps. Double that value again for the ping that represents. An extra 20 millisecond delay corresponds to an extra 40 millisecond ping, roughly speaking. Still, despite Halo 3's significant disadvantage caused by its low frame rate, Advanced Warfare somehow manages to have higher delays. So this year's Call of Duty is clearly flawed even at 0 ping, but unlike Modern Warfare 3, higher pings won't improve your experience, so we need to take a look at matchmaking quality, something which has shown few signs of consistency up to this point. I had originally intended to delay my review until matchmaking quality stabilized post-launch. However, approaching 2 months, it's getting to be ridiculous. Since release, with the help of approximately 60 participants, I have completed 5 assessments of matchmaking quality. Each used a total of 100 matches, only taking ping into account. This is an evaluation of connection quality, not the effectiveness of skill-based matchmaking. Connection to the dedicated servers was blocked during testing. The first test, conducted on the day 0 launch as merely a trial run, showed exceptionally high-quality matchmaking for a recent COD game. Matchmaking chose servers with higher pings than known servers only 8 times, and in those 8 cases there was a difference of only about 20 milliseconds ping. Essentially, the matchmaking system was working about as well as one could expect it to while still prioritizing speed. That is in stark contrast to Ghosts, of course, which match players into higher ping matches about 90% of the time. Unfortunately, Advanced Warfare's matchmaking quality has declined since its release. At times, it has been nothing short of terrible. Please note that these results may have been influenced by skill-based matchmaking, which, despite the existence of a separate ranked playlist, appears to be present in unranked casual games as well. I could upload an entire video just to discuss why that is a terrible idea, but many others already have. Despite these wide variations in matchmaking quality, it is still worth being aware of its current behavior. When first loading the game and the text fetching online profile or equivalent appears, the game attempts connection to the dedicated servers, if your platform has them of course. If connection is not established at that time, or if the connection is not deemed of an appropriate quality perhaps, You will never connect to said dedicated servers again during that session. You will need to restart the entire game, or you will only connect to player hosts. Assuming connection to the dedicated servers was successful, when looking for a match, you will only connect to other players, never dedicated servers directly. Players host the lobbies until such time as the match would start, at which point a dedicated server is selected to host the match. Assuming the prior criteria is met, you will get a dedicated server. Otherwise, the player hosting the lobby will also host the match. It is worth noting that a client's connection quality to the potential dedicated server is not tested prior to selection, often resulting in matches with greater latency, or in some cases a dropped connection entirely. For those games which are in progress and hosted by a dedicated server, matchmaking is still handled by the players. You will connect to the player hosting the lobby, then be transferred to the dedicated server hosting the match if there is an open slot. Altogether important information for those who are having trouble connecting to the dedicated servers, or conversely, those players who do not wish to connect to said servers, which brings me to the next point. We must also take a look at the type of netcode used in Advanced Warfare, certainly following the extremely controversial changes implemented in Modern Warfare 3 and Black Ops 2. At first glance, this game appears to behave like most others, much like Ghosts, for example, where a lower ping results in better gameplay. There are no obvious attempts to alter the player experience in a way which artificially disadvantages certain players, or obvious attempts to manipulate delays within player-hosted matches. On the dedicated servers, however, I have observed a massive inconsistency, differences of up to 200 milliseconds in delays between consecutive matches on the same server, even large variations within the same match in some cases, symptoms of extremely poor connection quality, connections being dropped entirely, etc., at least some of which occurs for all players in the match at the same time, eliminating any client-side origins. At this point, I cannot isolate the cause from my position as an end user. It could be anything from hardware to software, from the company hosting the dedicated servers to the developers to neither. I could say what my intuition tells me is occurring, but this video is not the place for speculation. If I do come across the proof I require, I'll post an update. Until then, I suppose this behavior will remain the realm of the theorists. Continuing along the vein of prior changes which have caused an uproar in the community, we're also going to take a look at time to kill. In Ghosts, a lot of players were taken aback by the extremely fast deaths they would incur in relation to the other Call of Duty titles. This was, however, not reflected in the weapon stats. Damage, rate of fire, range, etc. were all roughly equal between the games despite the perceived difference in time to kill. Instead, it came down to how the game handled damage, something which has changed over the years. In previous CODs, there were what could best be described as bugs which had significant effect on time to kill. For example, in Black Ops 1, when aiming down sight with an automatic weapon and holding the trigger down, some of the bullets fired had no apparent effect. It was roughly 1 bullet to 3 blanks fired. They would reduce the ammo count, but do no damage. Ghosts had all but eliminated that issue, but in doing so, it inadvertently broke the game in the minds of many gamers. With the bug removed and the game working properly, effective time to kill was reduced significantly, and the developers did not rebalance the weapons to account for that. When discussing time to kill in this context, we should separate it into 3 parts: the actual time to kill, when a player dies on the server, a player's experience of time to kill, that is, when killing other players, and a player's experience of time to death, the time between the player's first indication of taking damage to being completely dead. The actual time to kill is roughly the delay from the shooting player to the host, plus the weapon's time to kill as reflected in the stats, while the player's experience of time to kill is roughly that same delay, plus the delay from the host back to that player. Time to death, however, is entirely different. Theoretically, it would be nearly equal to the time to kill in the weapon stats, but it is not. Certain CODs suffer from a damage spike event, wherein damage from multiple bullets is either sent or displayed simultaneously. This would result in anything from a slightly reduced time to death in cases where damage from only 2 bullets was stacked, to instant death in cases where enough damage was stacked to kill a player outright with no damage indication whatsoever. Advanced Warfare is no exception. We can see everything from correct time to death to reduced to instant death. After recording 1,000 deaths, the percentages are as follows: a 63% chance to experience a proper time to death, a 34% chance to experience a reduced time to death, and a 3% chance to experience true instant death. As one might expect, players wish to have as much time as possible to react to incoming damage, while at the same time wish to kill other players quickly. It can be difficult for a developer to find a time to kill which is appropriate in both cases. This damage spike does not help matters, for not only is there a perceptual difference between the two, but an actual difference as well. Next up is lag compensation. Here I'm referring specifically to the code which allows a player to fire directly at other players without leading, not the blanket term for netcode as used colloquially. Some of you might refer to this as hit detection, but that carries a different connotation as that applies all the time, not just when lag is involved. At higher pings in Advanced Warfare, this aspect of networking simply does not work correctly. As seen here with a ping of roughly 300 milliseconds, despite many bullets hitting their target, no hit markers are ever returned. The cause for this may be simple. The developers appear to be using the value of half ping as one-way latency, when that is almost never true in the real world. This will be part of the programming series, but I'll give a short explanation here anyways. Lag compensation, which is run on the server, needs to rewind the game state to see the world as it was from the player's point of view when that player fired. Then it can determine if the player hit its target. But in order to do that, it needs to know how far back in time to rewind. Ignoring some other factors for brevity, that is the packet travel time from the player to the server, or the one-way latency. In the real world, it can, and often does, take longer for a packet to travel to the server than from the server, or vice versa. If the devs just assume the travel time is half ping, the server will often rewind to the wrong time before testing if a player hit its target, causing incorrect hit detection as seen from the player's point of view. As for why it appears they're using the value of half ping, a simple demonstration. Here we have a very high ping, 900 milliseconds. When that ping is comprised of 450 milliseconds upstream latency, 450 milliseconds downstream latency, lag compensation works correctly. The other player takes damage based on where it was in the past, not where it is now, which is its intended functionality. When that ping is made up of 600 milliseconds upstream latency, 300 milliseconds downstream, lag compensation does not work correctly. No damage is applied, despite the fact that the player fired on target. If I wait about 150 milliseconds before moving, lag compensation results in a hit, suggesting the use of half ping as latency. Alternatively, Advanced Warfare's lag compensation may be entirely broken. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt in a manner of speaking. For players, depending upon whether your connection to the specific server has more latency on the downstream or upstream side, you will either need to aim where your target was or where it will be. Unfortunately, that latency ratio varies considerably between servers and over time, so be prepared to adjust your aim often. Last in networking, an evaluation of movement smoothing. Moving players have a so-called SightAdvantage roughly equal to their delay plus or minus 20 milliseconds, during which time they can see other players early. More precisely, their player model won't move on their opponent's screen until this amount of time has passed. This is about the same as in COD Ghosts, fairly standard for the series, excluding the two worst games, and the one area where Advanced Warfare actually has less delay than the average game. However, given the extremely high baseline delay, run-and-gun players will still often die to opponents they cannot see. Moving on to game design, I have a lot of good things to say this time around. We have finally been given a glimpse of something which could be enjoyable to play. On the other hand, it has a great deal of flaws, some of which I've discussed previously. Footsteps, or the lack thereof, toughness combined with sniper rifles, extremely low head damage multipliers. I could go on forever, but they're all plainly obvious, so I won't bother discussing them this year. It seems as if Sledgehammer was in the process of creating a slightly different experience, but then panicked halfway through and countered all of their changes. Faster movement in more directions had the potential to widen the skill gap, for example, being that we are discussing a game in a genre which rewards both speed and accuracy. Their decision to make aim irrelevant with the practically non-existent damage multipliers and increased aim assist on consoles acts to reverse that effect, greatly reducing the skill gap. Thus one could make the argument that while they have added new features, they provide no real use, and while they do change the gameplay, they provide no depth. This places the game in a very awkward position, where the players who enjoyed more standard gameplay similar to the previous CODs hate the movement mechanics and the generally open map design, while the players who enjoy classic, fast-paced shooters hate the balancing they have done to reduce the influence of core skills. The devs should know that if they try to cater to everyone at such a basic level, they will end up pleasing no one. There is a correct way to do that, by adding depth to the game, allowing skilled gameplay to flourish without creating a barrier for casual players, but what they have done is certainly not that. Nevertheless, at least when compared to the more recent titles, Advanced Warfare is still a solid first solo entry into the series by Sledgehammer Games. Without question, they have proven themselves as a capable studio, injecting new life into a stagnating series which had clearly run out of good ideas. Furthermore, they have surpassed their predecessors, creating a game with both more innovation and fewer new design flaws than we have seen in years. However, their game remains haunted by the past. While they have not repeated many of the inexplicably horrendous decisions made in the previous releases, there are still many more they have, the most indisputable effect of which being the continued existence of a completely unnecessary delay in the sending or receiving of information over the network. Sledgehammer did not directly cause this. In fact, Advanced Warfare is far better than some of the recent COD titles in many areas. However, its player experience is objectively worse than every other game tested outside the Call of Duty series, even when compared to games running at half its frame rate. One day, the developers will realize they should not keep reusing the same material when it doesn't work properly to begin with. Unfortunately for all, that day has not yet come. Feel free to leave your comments and questions below, preferably keeping them civil, for in the end we all want the same thing, an enjoyable, functional game.